Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com, which covers all of the above. Joined, as always, this week by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing this Friday, Scott?
I am doing very well. It is Friday morning. One of the things that I wanted to point out, we won't be able to get into it because it's not resolved, is, as once this comes out, there may be a big crater in Lonsdale where there's an ongoing situation.
Yeah,
Friday, even as we speak, with a steel box full of dynamite that is smoldering, and they don't know. They got the bomb squad out there. They've got evacuated the area around this recycling center out there just off Western Avenue.
Half the population or more of Knox County got these somewhat ambiguous emergency alerts on their phones on Thursday saying, mandatory evacuation in the area of Western Avenue and Minders.
The first one they got didn't say that.
Didn't even say where.
It just said right. Hey, evacuation. Yeah. It's like, oh.
This may be something to follow up on after this whole event.
Yeah, but it did go out, but the area that was actually evacuated it's about a 1 mile radius or so around CDM or CMC recycling. This is adjacent to the big steel mill that's over in Lonsdale. People can see very visible, and the same company owns it, but the steel recycling facility. They apparently had this box delivered, and they were going to be breaking it down to recycle it, and they
realized that it.
No, well, what they did was, and this came out this morning at a press conference, is that they got a blowtorch to start breaking down the thing, and that's what started whatever is smoldering in there. But they got it open, and they looked, and there was apparently dynamite in there.
Yeah, you don't want to take a blowtorch to the box full of dynamite.
No, and they don't know how old the dynamite is. They don't know how stable it is.
Right.
And because it's smoldering, they really can't do anything. The normal way that they neutralize dynamite is with diesel fuel. They soak it with diesel fuel. Well, you got something burning in there,
It could be a problem.
Although diesel fuel, you can practically drop a match in diesel fuel and it won't, nothing will happen. But that was 14-year-old me in the backyard. That's not
right.
A bomb squad in an urban neighborhood with a box full of dynamite.
That may be the most incredibly counterintuitive thing I've ever heard in my life.
Diesel
throw
fuel
diesel fuel on dynamite to make sure it doesn't blow
up. It's a chemical reaction.
Oh, I understand it. Just like the gut reaction to that phrase, Let's throw fuel on a fire.
Throw gas on it. Well, it's not actual gas. It's diesel.
Well, it's not in normal circumstances.
Right, it's not on fire. In the first place,
right? So, but anyway, that's ongoing now. This is Friday morning. This started Thursday night. About 1,200 people had to leave their homes. They've got a shelter set up, and by the time this airs, hopefully this will be resolved.
Right, everybody can go home.
And hopefully it will be resolved without an explosion. They had no timeline or anything. So anyway, hopefully let's keep our fingers crossed that is not the news of the weekend. And
that's right.
Those
of you in the future listening will probably know more about this than we know right now. But we will talk about whatever the resolution of this is next week.
Absolutely.
For this week, we have several things to hit on. Some renovation and expansion news at the historic Tennessee Theater downtown. We'll take a look at the District 14 State House race between incumbent Jason Zachary and challenger Amanda Collins. A new organization has formed in Knox County to advocate for better climate planning and action. Somewhat timely, given some of our recent meteorological events. The Knox County School Board is looking once again at changing its student harassment and discrimination policies. We'll talk about that. And Scott, speaking of those meteorological events, and that's a word you should probably not say too many times on the air. Meteorological.
I haven't had enough coffee to be able to say that yet.
Well, there has been still this past week. Of course, last week we talked a lot about the floods in Upper East Tennessee and Western North Carolina and all the response that there has been here. That has continued in a lot of ways to kind of dominate local conversation, local media. We ran, I just kind of want to give a shout out, a piece by our outdoors writer for Compass, Kim Trevathan.
That's how I pronounce it.
Trevathan.
I don't know how he pronounces it.
I know. We should ask him one of these days. Kim Trevathan, who actually moved to Asheville not too long ago, earlier this year. And so he was there when the flooding happened. And he wrote, I thought, Scott, a really good and almost kind of hallucinatory account of his experience there over the day of the flooding and the subsequent days. Just almost dreamlike / nightmarish transformation of the community. And that story is actually outside our paywall now. You can find it linked on our website. So even if you're not a subscriber, you can read it. And I would certainly recommend everybody do so. It is just a very vivid account of kind of what it's like to live through that kind of totally transformative disaster.
One of the things that I thought that was really good about that is the Friday morning after the storm hit, he had arranged to go play tennis and was woke up and the power was out, so he didn't get any news. But then again, there are storms and the power goes out all the time. That's
right. And his cell phone service was out. So
and this is mountains of North Carolina. Your cell phone service is going to be spotty anyway.
Yep.
And didn't realize the extent of it, and that was one of the things that his discovery
kind
is a really
drives down, wondering if maybe he's still going to have a tennis game. And kind of sinks in that not only is there not going to be any tennis.
And that kind of discovery of how bad it was, and then the rest of the week of things, and it just kind of a matter of fact. This is what I saw. This is this, and it's a very, very good piece. Highly recommended, even if it wasn't on our website.
That's right.
I would recommend somebody reading that.
And then, really, just throughout the week, we continued to see efforts by local government officials, local nonprofits. It's almost sort of any place that I have gone in Knoxville. I was just talking about how the gym I go to, they were organizing a donations drive. You go into grocery stores, and there's places you can donate. It really has continued to be a widespread community response.
Oh, absolutely. Mayor Glenn Jacobs has been involved in a lot of fundraising or donation drives. Knoxville Mayor India Kincannon went up to Newport, where a nonprofit called New Directions Health Solutions from Knoxville has gone and set up a recovery center to hand out donations, and that's run by Cynthia Finch, and she is from Newport, so she was helping out her hometown. Mayor Kincannon went up there. So there's the city had, early on they sent their swift water rescue units up there. Just recently this week or last week they sent up public service employees with trucks and all to help things out in Carter County. I believe Carter or Unicoi County. I don't remember which now off the top of my head, but up in the affected areas. So there's there's a lot of aid going on there. The state of Tennessee, Governor Bill Lee announced has set up a loan fund for local communities to do two things. First is to repair their water systems. And then the second area would be for debris removal. It's $100 million fund, and that basically it's so they can get the work done faster. They will eventually get reimbursed from FEMA, but basically what it is you got to go in and spend the money to do the work, and then you get reimbursed by FEMA. Well, a lot of these counties, the devastation is so widespread and so just mind-boggling, in its scope, that they can't afford to do it themselves. So the state is going to come in and loan them no interest loans, so they can get it done now, and then when FEMA gets reimbursed, all that.
Right, so kind of a cash flow.
Yeah, it's a cash
problem.
Flow thing. But it's one of those things that is basically a solution that was made up on the spot. That in response to this storm, this isn't something that was in place before. This is something that that the state was nimble enough to be able to do.
And of course, throughout this, there has continued to be this sort of ongoing sub-narrative of misinformation and disinformation being spread about both the impact of the disaster and the response, particularly the federal response to it. Various stories being circulated about FEMA representatives showing up and doing various nefarious things, confiscating donations or threatening to arrest people, and so on and so forth. None of those are true. They have all been debunked sort of over and over. One of the most persistent things, I saw this on Abby Ham, who's a reporter and anchor for WBIR.
Mm-hmm.
She had gone over to Asheville for the week and had been reporting from there, and she put up a post talking about the fact that every time she reports from there, she gets overwhelmed by these comments from people who are sure that she's hiding something. There's these stories that, that the death toll is vastly greater than what's been reported, and that people are like hiding bodies somehow, and there's all this kind of stuff out there. And she, among many other reporters who have been in the vicinity, are reporting back saying no, these things aren't true. People who live in these areas are going on social media and saying don't stop reposting this. The FEMA administrator gave a briefing for reporters from all the affected areas this past week that we were able to listen in on as well. She said that they think that a certain amount of that stuff is being propelled by foreign actors, which would certainly be in line with other things that we see around political controversies on social media, especially during, at the height of a presidential election. There's a lot of documentation that Russia, China, Iran, all of these various,
all of the above,
nefarious actors are engaged in kind of trying to stoke these various, partisan fires and so forth. And the politics of it are a little tricky, as County Mayor Glenn Jacobs found this past week, because coming right out of the disaster in that first wave of disinformation, he was among the local officials who went on Twitter or X.com and posted saying, I am not aware of anybody from FEMA doing any of these things that anybody's saying. Stop spreading all of this stuff. It's not helping anybody. That got picked up and repeated and reported various places, including even in the New York Times, as an example of like local Republican officials pushing back against misinformation. But Jacobs, of course, is, we all assume, running for governor in what we also assume will be a competitive Republican primary. He does not necessarily, in that context, want to be tagged as like the pro-FEMA guy, because FEMA right now is under a Democratic administration. And he did not want to be seen as like an apologist for the federal response. And so then he came back on Twitter and said, well, I'm not saying FEMA's, basically said, I'm not aware of FEMA doing anything at all in Tennessee. Everything that's being done here is, I'm just saying that these rumors aren't true, but everything that's being done here is being done by locals and state officials. Well, that's not true. Like, FEMA is active in Tennessee.
Yeah, as of midweek last week, FEMA had, just as an example, they've done more, but they've provided $5.1 million in assistance to more than 900 households in Upper East Tennessee as of midweek last week. So it's obviously probably more than that now, as people's applications get approved for assistance. So
the most obviously accurate thing to say is that governments at all levels, federal, state, and local, have been responding in many different ways to what is obviously a logistically complex situation, in addition to nonprofit organizations, grassroots organizations. There has been a real upswelling, and it is, I guess, just a sign of the times overall, and then also a sign of the fact that we're just a few weeks out from a fiercely contested presidential election, that we can't even have a unified response without there being a lot of political infighting over it.
Well, and this misinformation has real world consequences. One of the things that they've talked about is, if people believe this, then they will be less likely to come forward to get assistance. And then the Tennessee Department of Transportation has run into an issue, and they sent out a press release. They didn't. You got to read between the lines a little bit, but basically, they're trying to go out and repair state roads, and in order to do that, in many instances, they have to go onto someone's private property to be able to do the work. And they have a form that they send to the property owner asking for permission, because they've got to get permission. They can't just go onto your property. So they send that out, and
which is a standard form. They do this every time they're doing
long before Helene hit. They were using this form, and apparently there are people who are thinking it's a scam, or maybe they, that might be one of the that kind of could fall into that the lie that the government's trying to take your land, and all this other stuff, and they really just need to get on your property so they can do the work in front of your house,
right?
On that stretch of roadway, and they were imploring people. They basically asking the media's help in getting out the word that that's all this is. It's so we can fix the roads.
Yeah.
to get to your house. So there are, this misinformation does have an effect on the actual work on the ground.
Yeah, it creates an atmosphere of fear and distrust on top of what is already, of course, an extremely fraught and stressful situation for everybody. So it's unfortunate. And the FEMA administrator, Deanne Criswell, said that they do see some level of misinformation and in almost every major disaster they respond to. Sometimes well-intended, people just spreading what they want to be helpful information, but it's incorrect. But she said in this case, basically she said this is the worst they've ever seen. Yeah. And that if this is a sign of what we're going to have every single time we have a major disaster, that's just going to complicate recovery efforts going forward. So
well, they'll think twice before they redirect a hurricane to North Carolina.
That's right. Yes. Among the various theories circulating online, especially as Hurricane Milton hit Florida this week, was something being spread up by people up to and including members of Congress. Looking at you, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia, that there are people deliberately controlling the weather and directing hurricanes to hit various places for various political reasons. That is not even worth talking about. Of course, that is completely untrue. So anyway, I don't know that there's a whole lot more to say about that here from, our local angle, except that I think we can expect it. I mean, there's another benefit concert later this month at the Bijou Theater that's already been announced. I think we will continue to see efforts here, which is good because there are going to continue to be needs there. There is sort of short-term emergency recovery in a lot of these communities, both in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, but there's also going to be long-term recoveries there that will probably need continued support.
Even the short-term recovery is going to take a long time.
Yeah, it's not that short-term.
And winter's coming on.
Yep.
And so, and this is, these are mountain communities. Winter comes earlier in the mountains than it does down in here in the valley. So, it's going to continue to be a challenge, and we'll continue to keep tabs on it as far as how the folks here locally are responding.
Yep. All right. Something we wrote about this week is a proposal from the Knox County Law Department to rewrite some of the Knox County School Board's discrimination and harassment policies relating to students. And, on the face of it, what's being proposed here is, seems like kind of a semantic change. These are policies that spell out the various ways that students are to be protected from harassment and discrimination. And the current policies include lists of protected classes, and those lists come from federal laws, the various civil rights acts that we have, that basically say you cannot be discriminated against on the basis of, and then, I think a lot of us kind of know these lists. It's race, religion, ethnicity. I think it says like marital or family status, sexual orientation, gender, etc. So that kind of like the whole list of things that are protected specifically, spelled out in federal law, and the school board's current policies, which have been in place for quite a while, just incorporate that federal language. So County Deputy Law Director Gary Dupler, who is the legal advisor to the school board assigned by the county law department, he brought a proposal to delete all of those long lists and just say on any basis. You can't discriminate on any basis, and students can't be harassed on any basis. He said that this is because of change in wording in one state law, which did happen this past year, where it's a law that spells out basically a teacher's code of ethics and their responsibilities to their students. And one of the things in the state law had said that teachers can't discriminate against students, and it had that same laundry list from the federal laws. The state law changed that wording to say teachers can't discriminate on any basis. And that's all the state law said. It said, we're going to change the wording in this one section of state law. Now, Dupler acknowledged that changing that wording in the state law does not actually change anything about legal protections. Those federal civil rights laws are in place. Those categories are protected under those laws. Whether you have that language in a state law or a school board policy or not, those protections are there. But he said, well, the state changed the language, so we should change the language too. And in a policy review discussion of this with school board members, several Democratic members of the school board raised questions about this, basically saying, their basic question was, well, do we have to? And Dupler initially said, well, yes, the state is basically saying that, yes, we would like school boards to do this. And so school board member Ann Templeton, who's one of the newly elected Democrats on the board, said, well, I read the whole law, both the actual bill that changed it and then the law that got changed. And she said, I don't see any place in here where it says anything at all about what school boards should do or what school board policies should say. And she is correct. The law does not say a single thing about that. And she asked Dupler if he could show her where in the law it said that. And he didn't really answer that question. He just said, well, our opinions are just advisory. You guys can, that's my interpretation. I mean, that's basically what he said was, well, that's my interpretation. And so Templeton and Patricia Fontenot Ridley, who's the other newly elected Democrat on the board, kind of pushed back and said that, we think there's value. Why don't we say on any basis, including but not limited to, and kind of keep those lists? Because their argument was that those lists are mostly of sort of marginalized groups. And so their argument was that for students in our schools who are members of these various groups, it's affirming to them to have this written down, to say that, yes, our school system explicitly recognizes that we are here and is sending a message that, you are not to discriminate or harass us on the basis of these various characteristics, that it was basically a show of support and that they thought it was worth keeping. Now, some of the Republican members of the board, including board chair Betsy Henderson, kind of said, well, we like the on any basis language. That's more inclusive. It's more inclusive to say on any basis than to because if you spell it out, you're leaving somebody out. And again, that went back to Fontenot Ridley's saying, well, why don't we just do both? Say on any basis, including these specific ones. The backstory here that I think is, that kind of puts this thing in needed context is that this is the third time Dupler has made essentially this proposal or one very like it since 2017. The previous ones were a little bit narrower. The previous ones were specifically aimed at taking out any wording related to sexual orientation and gender identity and just replacing them with the word sex. But it was the same basic idea that, well, we don't have to be so specific. Let's make it more general. And interestingly, all three times, Dupler's reasoning has been tied to either a state law or regulation or a federal court decision or something, saying, well, this Supreme Court decision came down, or this state regulation says this, and so, we should change our language. But all three times it has been a different law or regulation. So it's kind of like he keeps coming back over and over with some new reason that he thinks the school board should make this change. The previous two times that he brought this, there was outcry from the community, especially from the LGBTQ community, who perceived this as specifically an attack on them, specifically the school system backing away from any explicit acknowledgement at all that they have, LGBTQ students, and, argued forcefully that it's important to keep this there specifically to protect and to send a message to students who are often marginalized, who are, there's lots of statistics. LGBTQ students are more likely to be bullied. They can often feel isolated in school and so on and so forth. And so this will come to the school board for a vote at its November meeting. Actually, it has to be voted on twice. It's a policy change. So there'll be a first reading in November. If it passes there'll be a second reading in December. I guess it'll just be interesting to see if now that we have a more starkly officially partisan school board with a very clear 5-4 Republican Democratic split. Will the 5 Republicans this time, even though some of them have backed off of doing this in the past, but will they this time, kind of go along with making this change, even though there certainly will be continued, protest from people who think that there's value in having that language there. And Dupler did acknowledge, he was like, you guys have to abide by the federal laws, whether you spell them out or not. Which is one of the things that led some school board members to say, well, why don't we just spell them out then?
I've got a question. You've read the law, and I haven't, the exact language of the law. But when you say that you can't discriminate on any basis, we're talking about any basis.
Yeah.
It could be, and it's not tied to anything. I mean, you can make up whatever you want.
Right. I mean, certainly it would include the federal laws because they are there regardless. But you're right. It could be, you can't discriminate against a student for wearing a hat in school or something.
Yeah. I mean, they could claim it anyway.
Yeah.
They might not prevail, but you can claim it.
Yeah.
You're discriminating against me, because you gave me an F, and you're discriminating against unprepared or stupid students. Right.
I'm the shortest student in the class, and I also got the lowest grade. What's going on here?
Yeah. You're making me feel bad. So when you say any basis, that means any basis.
Yeah, and that is one of the interesting things here, because law departments and the county law department are typically very wary of any wording that is too broad, specifically because it opens you up to potential liabilities. If you say, that we're not going to discriminate on any grounds, then there might be all sorts of grounds that are not federally protected, but that somebody could still say, at least under your own policy, you can't do this. So, I mean, I think that there, first of all, there is a partisan bent to this. And second, I do think that it continues to be primarily about wanting to take out language that acknowledges sexual orientation and gender identity as classes and categories of students. And the biggest tell for that is that the 2 lawmakers who sponsored this bill that changed this language in the state law was Representative Gino Bolso from Brentwood and State Senator Janice Bowling from Tullahoma, who are both very socially conservative representatives who both have track records of pursuing specifically anti-LGBTQ legislation. Bolso was the one who proposed a bill this past year to try to ban pride flags, and only pride flags, from schools. The reason that bill fell apart was because you actually can't do that. You can't say, because he didn't want to say that they can't have other kinds of flags, and so the legal challenge to that would be obvious. Like that is viewpoint discrimination, which is prohibited under the First Amendment. But Bowling was the one who 3 or 4 years ago, well after the Obergefell decision at the Supreme Court, made marriage equality a right across the country. She tried to pass a law in 2020 saying that the state would only issue marriage licenses to couples that were a man and a woman. And so these are both lawmakers who are not, let's say, allies of Tennessee's LGBTQ population. And so the fact that this bill came from both of them, I think just tells you something about, well, if you look at legislative intent, what was the mindset of the people behind it? It's not that hard to see it. So you can read our account of that discussion on our website, and this is going to come to the school board in November, and I'm sure we will be talking about it more there. Scott, another thing we wrote about this week, you had a good long look at a local group, and of course they've been active now for a while, but the timing of us writing about them, I think was, I guess, sadly fortuitous in a way, because they are encouraging more robust action on climate preparedness and carbon emissions and so forth here in Knox County, right?
Yeah, this is a group called Knox Climate Watch. They're fairly recently formed. They just got their nonprofit status. but it's a group of middle-aged and older professionals, various fields, several scientists, climate scientists, soil scientists, geologists, and there's engineers, there are architects, there are other entrepreneurs. It's a group. They kind of informally would meet for lunch just to talk about things, and decided, hey, we're getting along in years. We need to do something about this, and so they formed Knox Climate Watch. One of the things that they've done is they looked at and they embrace that think globally, act locally theme. So they're going to look locally, and noted the city of Knoxville has a sustainability office. They have emission reduction goals, very ambitious emissions reduction goals, all that. And look, Knox County does not.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they decided to do was they were going to implore the county to take some action. One part of it would be to reduce emissions. Another part would be to prepare for climate events, that like Helene. Anyway, so they sent letters out. This was kind of interesting. They already knew or suspected that Mayor Glenn Jacobs would not be very receptive to this, and so they just sent these letters to county commissioners. Didn't hear back from them for a long time. Most of them still haven't heard back from most of them. But in order to create a plan or a policy like that, you would need the mayor's office to be involved. So talk to Mayor Jacobs, who indeed they were pretty right not to even go to him, because he dismisses it out. He dismisses climate change.
Right. Jacobs doesn't believe that man-made climate change is a major challenge.
Oh, no. In fact, it was a very long
statement
to me that I didn't use it in its entirety because the article wasn't really about debating whether climate change is real or not. It was about the political part of this. But his position politically is that we've got more pressing matters than climate change. And but yeah, I had talked to members of this group a while back, and this was kind of one of those stories that didn't have what we call in the business a news peg. But then we get Helene, and one of the things that that climate scientists, and we had one from UT who talked about this for the story. One of the things that about climate change is it, the waters of the oceans are warmer.
Which is true.
That is true.
Whether you believe that is caused by human activity or not, it is true that the ocean waters are warmer.
The ocean waters this year, especially the Gulf of Mexico waters, are very, several degrees above the historic average, and that basically fuels. It does two things. It fuels hurricanes, more evaporation, therefore more moisture in the clouds of the hurricanes, so that, for instance, Helene, when it came in, it still had plenty of punch when it got to North Carolina,
and a whole lot of water,
but it also does it faster.
Mm-hmm.
Helene went from a Category 1 storm to a Category 4 storm in less than a day.
Mm-hmm.
Milton went from a Category 1 to a Category 5 in about 12 hours.
Yep.
I mean, just incredible speed in which this it just built up. And so you can basically Helene Helene's power and probably the Helene's ability to wreak havoc as far inland as it did is a direct result of the conditions in the Gulf, which virtually all climate scientists will say is from.
And it matches models that have been put out there for years saying as the climate, as the atmosphere warms, this is what we are going to see.
Right.
And so, again, whether or not you believe, quote unquote, in any of these things, they are happening.
Yeah.
People can, I suppose, argue about, Marjorie Taylor Greene can say it's because Kamala Harris is sitting up in some tower with a wand directing the hurricane or whatever, but you can't deny that it's actually happening.
Yeah. And and there are politicians. Jacobs was fine talking about it. He was a bunch of hooey. We've got more important things to worry about. The debt, the potential for violence after the November 5th election, other things that are what he called bigger existential threats. The others didn't. I also talked to Mike Hammond and Commissioner Larson J., both of whom are running for county mayor because Jacobs is term limited and presumably running for governor. I asked both of them; they were both kind of non-committal about it. Then I reached out to Gina Oster, who's the chair of the commission, and with pretty much would control anything came up in commission. Didn't even hear back from her.
Mm-hmm.
Do know that I did hear back from kind of the ranking Democrat on the panel. That's Courtney Durrett. She was open to it. Noted though that the county's budget is pretty flat. It's kind of
right
hard
to set
pay
up
for
any
anything.
kind of new operation in the county. Like if they wanted to create an office of sustainability, like the city of Knoxville has, those would be some budgeted positions.
Yeah,
they'd have to figure out
in charge of it. Yeah, there would be costs associated with it. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, and this is something that's been kind of humming along. I won't say under the radar, but just not hasn't been getting a whole lot of attention, including by us. The city of Knoxville went to the the Knoxville-Knox County Planning Commission and the Transportation Planning Organization, and to go after this. There's a federal grant. It was a $1 million federal grant that they received to basically develop a regional plan for emissions reductions and various climate-related things. And they're in the midst of developing that plan now. What's interesting about that is when I say regional, I mean the metropolitan statistical area, which is Knox County and 8 surrounding counties. And what this does is they're planning in getting ready, being prepared for when federal funding opportunities come open, they can apply. Because whenever, almost invariably, you have to have a project with an estimated budget and all this other stuff to go to the feds to get funding. And they don't just give you money and say, come up with a plan, generally. Well, they did on this, the planning part of it. But they don't give you money and then say, build something. You've got to tell them this is what we want to build, and they give you the money or not. But anyway, this project's going on. Multiple partners, the city of Knoxville, Oak Ridge, Maryville, Alcoa, those cities are all involved. TVA, Oak Ridge National Lab. There are all these
KUB,
right? KUB, Maryville College, various stakeholders in the area,
but not Knox County.
Yeah, and not any county,
right?
In the
because
region.
all of our county leadership around here, of course, is Republican, and we don't know for sure, but it's entirely possible that they share Jacob's views of the whole issues.
Right.
This is not an issue that Republicans talk about very much these days.
No, and so and this is kind of the advisory panel for this project is made up of representatives of those groups. Now, but one thing that's interesting is even though Knox County is not really participating in it, and even though there's no apparent appetite for coming up with Knox County's own plan, they would be able to use this process to help to apply for grants for things like solar arrays or projects to make buildings more energy efficient, or to switch over part of their fleet to electric vehicles. All this, whatever these things are, they can still do it through this process. So, in fact, the TPO and the city of Knoxville through this process, they've got a working group of a couple hundred organizations where they're working on various things. Some of them are private sector, because it's not limited to governments. Private, if you have a company and you have a fleet of vehicles, and you want to, if there is a program available that allows grants to private companies to convert their fleets to electric vehicles, then you can apply for it. Then part of this thing is sharing all this kind of information, because the Knoxville office, sustainability office, may be aware of these programs, but if the city of Maryville or Blount County or any Knox County, if they're not aware of that program, they can't apply. They're not going to be able to apply for it. So anyway, that process is going on now. In fact, there's a survey that's the TPO has sent out. You can go to their website, and the Planning Commission's website, and find it. Or actually, they actually have a separate website for this project called Knox Breathe, and you can go there and find out more about it. But it is something that is this is apparently the first effort in Tennessee for a regional approach to coming up with ideas to address climate change and its ramifications.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will certainly continue to follow that. As far as the county goes, it will be interesting in 2 years when we come to the next round of elections, where the mayor's office is up and several commission seats, to see if this is an issue that anybody wants to talk about. Then that may somewhat depend on what happens between now and then.
Yes.
How many major or historical or whatever weather events we experience. This is the second time this year we have devoted time on this podcast to talking about climate issues, because the first time was back in January when we had a historic record-setting winter storm. Yeah. And so we have a record-setting winter storm in January. We have an unprecedented impact from a hurricane and flooding in September.
And very likely the hottest summer on record.
And right, we're still waiting for the final stats on that, but it was definitely a very hot summer. So we will see. One of the things that climate scientists have said for a long time about climate change is that they can sort of predict broad parameters of things that become more likely under these circumstances of a warming planet, but they don't know what's going to happen, when, or where.
Right.
So we all get to find out. It makes life exciting. All right. We also wrote this week about one of our local state house contests. This is in House District 14, which is basically Farragut and some of the surrounding suburban West Knox areas at the western end of the county. It is currently represented by State Representative Jason Zachary, who has held that seat since 2015. So he's running for he was elected initially in a special election, served 1 year. He's been reelected 4 times. So he's seeking his 5th full term now. And he is running against the same person he ran against 2 years ago, Democrat Amanda Collins, a former school psychologist who's been very active with local education issues in particular. And you can read our account of that race, as well as our profile of both of those candidates from 2 years ago on our website. And Scott, this one is, last week we talked about the District 18 race between Elaine Davis and Brian Goldberg, which Democrats locally are kind of putting all their chips on as their best bet to try to potentially flip a Republican-held seat. This is not that.
Yeah, this is one of the, I would argue, 2 safest seats.
The other one is District 19 in East Knox County, where there's not even a Democrat running this year.
It's a heavily Republican district. The precincts there all overwhelmingly vote Republican. Zachary has, every time he's run, he's gotten right around 2/3 of the vote.
Yeah.
So basically, he's won by a landslide every time he's run, and it's just a real tall task for Democrats to be competitive in this district.
And Zachary is certainly treating it that way. He barely has a re-election campaign. He doesn't even, as far as I can tell, he doesn't have a campaign website, nothing like that. He's been doing very little active campaigning. He has been very active in recent weeks with the relief efforts after Hurricane Helene. That's certainly worth saying. But he has not even raised that much money by the standards of an incumbent Republican legislator. He's raised about $35,000 this year. Collins has raised just under $5,000. So it's not a real high dollar race, which again, I think shows, Republicans aren't worried about the seat. Democrats are not investing heavily in it because it does look like a heavy lift. Zachary is also he has not appeared at any forums that Collins has been at, and he didn't respond to our questions. Initially I, of course, sought him out for an interview, and I proposed that if he didn't have time or didn't want to do that, maybe he would answer some email questions. And he said, okay, send me some questions, which I did. And then I sent him a few prompts for response and never heard anything. It's not that he never responds to the media. He responds to us sometimes, but I think around elections in particular, he probably doesn't see any reason to. Also, the limited amount of fundraising that he has done is almost all from political action committees. I think there's one donation he's reported in the last 18 months from an individual. All of the rest of it, so of that $35,000 plus, $35,200 of it or whatever has come from political action committees representing major interests in the state, the building industry, the housing industry, mortgage brokers. He's got a big donation from the Reynolds Tobacco and Nicotine Company. That's where essentially all of his money is coming from, is those big entrenched interests who they give to incumbent lawmakers, in some cases, incumbent lawmakers of both parties, especially in Tennessee, incumbent Republicans, because they have a supermajority in the legislature. They just give to all the Republicans. They just write checks to all of them. So it's not like Zachary is even doing very much for those. He's taking an extremely passive approach to this entire election.
He has achieved the dream of virtually everyone who has run for office, and that is he doesn't have. First of all, he's almost assured of winning. He is pretty much assured of winning, and he doesn't have to ask people for money.
Yep.
That is one of the things when you talk to people who run for office, especially if it's their first or second time, they really hate asking individual people they know for money. It's almost like they feel like they're begging.
Yep.
And that's an almost universal complaint of running for office. Zachary doesn't do it.
Yep.
Doesn't have to.
Yep.
Because he's got all this PAC money. He doesn't need to, and he doesn't need anything beyond that because he's in such a safe district. So
right, and it's certainly not that he couldn't raise money. I mean, that is not only a conservative district, but it's a quite affluent district. If Zachary, if there was a perception that the race was competitive, Zachary could probably raise a boatload of money in Farragut.
He could raise $200,000 in a month. Easy.
Yeah, but he's not because he doesn't
have to.
He needs to. Now, Collins is making the case, which is, Democrats across the state are making this case that she thinks Zachary is more vulnerable than he thinks he is because she thinks he and the Republican supermajority are out of touch with the actual interests of their constituents. And, we've talked about this. There are these statewide surveys done by Vanderbilt and other places showing that there are majorities of Tennesseans in favor of, for example, less restrictive abortion laws, more restrictive gun safety laws, those kinds of there's not necessarily a tremendous amount of support for school vouchers, which is a major priority of Governor Bill Lee, and the Republican supermajority has been at least somewhat supportive of it. She argues that because of that, the Republicans are in for a rude awakening because they've let themselves be responsive to various specific interest groups, and they're not listening to what people in the state want. And certainly that's an argument to make if you're a Democrat running. And, maybe that will be true sometime. Maybe it'll be true this time. There's just, there isn't anything in any recent election results, certainly not in the 14th district, to suspect that. And even if Zachary is, I think last time he won, he got 64% of the vote. Even if that slipped down a little bit to 63 or 62%, I don't think that would be the kind of thing that would cause a lot of stress for him or Republicans in general.
No, and that's one of the things that there are, these polls that do show a majority of Tennesseans prefer policies that aren't being pushed by the state Republican Party, but is it enough to get the voters to vote for a Democrat? And when I can't tell you how many Republicans that I have talked to, and generally speaking, is about the presidential race, who expressed displeasure and dissatisfaction with the Republican candidate, but then they say, "I just can't vote for a Democrat."
Yeah,
even though they disagree with the person, they think the person's unfit for office, they'll still say, "I just can't vote for a Democrat." And so until and unless the policy differences are enough to get those Republicans to vote for a Democrat, then this district is, barring something unforeseen, still going to be a Republican district for a long time.
Yeah, certainly looks like it. But you can find our coverage of that race, including some discussion of some of the more controversial issues that Zachary has been involved with. He was the sponsor of the abortion trafficking bill that passed this year, for example, and you can find that story on our website. And I should mention the election coverage that we have done of some of our competitive races. We will be moving all of those outside the paywall when early voting starts this coming week. So even if you are not a subscriber, you will be able to go and read those. All right, the one other thing I wanted to mention this week that we wrote about was some expansion plans at the Tennessee Theater. And I probably don't have to tell anybody listening what a gem in the community the Tennessee Theater is. Anybody who has ever been to the Tennessee Theater, no doubt, remembers that experience vividly. It is a gorgeous, ornate movie palace that first opened in 1928 and has been variously restored and updated over the years, and continues to be a major entertainment venue. They do still show movies there sometimes, but more often a venue for live performances of various kinds. I was just at a concert there the other week when My Morning Jacket played, and My Morning Jacket lead singer Jim James didn't actually talk to the crowd a whole lot, but one of the few things he did say was he kind of stood on the edge of the stage looking around the theater and just said, this is really a gorgeous place, and we are all so lucky to be able to be as performers or audience members in a space like this, and it's a real pleasure and a treasure, which I think is how lots of people in Knoxville feel about it. However, the theater is almost 100 years old, and I'm sure when we come up to 2028 in a few years, there will be a big celebration of its centennial. And in accommodating the needs of current, modern performance, production requirements and so forth, as well as the comfort of modern audiences, it sometimes runs into problems, particularly just not having enough space to do everything. So a few years ago, they purchased a building. It's actually two door fronts down on Gay Street. The Mechanics Bank and Trust building, originally built in 1908 itself, so another historic structure. And even though it's not right next to the Tennessee, the theater actually wraps around behind it, because the theater space, the footprint at the back end of the building is much bigger than on the Gay Street sidewalk. And so it is actually adjacent at the back of the Mechanics Bank building. And they are in the process of renovating it, they being the Historic Tennessee Theater Foundation, which is the nonprofit that owns and operates the theater. And they are spending close to $20 million on this big renovation project that is going to provide new spaces for receptions and maybe some very small-scale kinds of events within the building itself. But its biggest service is going to be as an adjunct to the Tennessee Theater. One whole floor of the building is going to be joined directly. You're going to be able to walk onto that floor from the balcony level of the Tennessee Theater, and it will have they're going to add a new full bar there, which is needed at the Tennessee Theater. If you're ever trying to get a drink or a snack, either before a show or during an intermission, those lines in the lobby or sometimes at the couple of other stations they set up can be quite long, so they'll have that. And maybe most significantly, they're going to add new bathrooms, and especially new women's restrooms, because that is a particular need that they have seen over time. So I'm sure audiences will be happy with that. One of the floors is also going to be a dedicated rehearsal space, which they just don't really have in the theater right now. And it has the approximate amount of space on the floor as the actual stage of the Tennessee Theater. And so when productions are coming to town and want to practice kind of blocking out stage directions and so forth, or if you have an orchestra coming to town that needs to rehearse, they will actually be able to do that there. They'll have a whole separate dedicated space that they don't have right now. And there is also another floor of the building that they have not yet decided what they're going to do with, or at least they haven't announced it. But Scott, I don't think there's a whole lot more to say about it. Just kind of wanted to note it because this is a real, it's a gem. Everybody calls it a gem. People who live here think of it that way. People who visit and get to see it think of it that way. And it's just kind of cool to see that not only does it continue to prosper, but it's actually going to expand in ways that will enhance its mission, as Becky Hancock, the executive director, said, for its second century. Yeah,
and the one thing about this project, you went the other day. went on tour the other day. I got to go there a while back when they first talked about doing this, and it's one of the great things about this. I think is it's such a creative way to connect these two buildings. Mm-hmm. That if you had asked me and just about anybody else, well, the Tennessee theater wants to expand, I'd go,
where?
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
But then again, that's why I'm not a creative architect, and But it really is an interesting project from that. That's one of the ways that's an interesting project. It's not the only way, but it is one of the reasons that is an interesting project to me, just because it's such a creative solution.
Yeah, and historic preservationists in town are very supportive of it. I talked to Jack Neely at the Knoxville History Project about it, and he said that it was a very unusual project in the sense that you have one historic building, the Tennessee Theater, actively taking a role in renovating and restoring and preserving another historic building. And Hancock said that in their design for the new spaces in the Mechanics Bank building, they're not going to try to replicate the exact look and feel of the Tennessee Theater. Kind of, how could you do that? It's a unique place. But also she said that it is its own building with its own history, and they want to respect that, and they will have various ways to kind of, it'll have a complementary feel, but you'll know that you're in a different space there. So anyway, it's an interesting project, and they are anticipating construction on at least the parts of it they're working on right now will be wrapped up about a year from now in the fall of 2025. So that's something for all theater goers to look forward to. All right, I guess we can look ahead to a couple of things in the coming week. Let's see, coming up on Tuesday, Scott, City Council is meeting. What are they up to?
Well, City Council is going to be up to a few things that are kind of interesting. There's a payment in lieu of tax proposal for the old Union building up by Immaculate Conception Church. Lawler Woods wanted to put in a new building there, mostly a residential building up there on Summit Hill, and so that's going to be up for discussion. The city is also looking to partner with the Tennessee Department of Transportation for a $6.7 million project that would connect the Fort Sanders neighborhood with Tyson Park, which, as you know, is there. You could throw a rock from Fort Sanders to Tyson Park if it weren't for Alcoa Highway. So this project is going to connect, make it a direct connection there. So that if you lived in Fort Sanders, you wouldn't have to, go down to if you were on foot anyway, you wouldn't have to go down to Cumberland, walk up, to where Tyson Park is. You could just go straight to it. Anyway, so that is, and then the other another thing that's on the agenda is the violence interruption group Turn Up Knox. They are coming to council with a funding request of $450,000. They have just received their nonprofit status, and they haven't had a chance to raise private money on their own. The city would be the second year that they've funded them. It will probably get some pushback from council member Amelia Parker, who is not really a big fan of Turn Up Knox. So that'll be interesting to see what that discussion ends up being.
Well, and that meeting is at 6:00 Tuesday in the main assembly room of the City County building.
Absolutely, and if you're interested, the beer board's meeting at 5. Same place.
The beer, just so you know, there is not beer at the beer board meetings.
There is not beer at the beer board meetings. They would be better attended if there were, but
That's right.
You know,
Popular but unproductive.
yes.
But while Scott is at that city council meeting on Tuesday, I will be over at yet another candidate forum being sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Knoxville-Knox County at 6:30 on Tuesday at the Knoxville Public Works Service Center, 3131 Morris Avenue. The candidates for State Senate District 6 will be appearing to answer questions from the audience. And that is Republican incumbent Senator Becky Duncan Massey and her Democratic opponent, DeMonica Bryan, have both committed to be there. So a little bit different than some of the other forums we've talked about recently, where not all of the candidates have showed up. Both of the candidates running are expected to be there. So if you want to hear what they have to say, you can come out there, or it will also be streamed online on the Facebook page of the League of Women Voters, which you can find online. And I will be serving as moderator there, so come on out and join us. And then that leads very nicely into the very next day, Wednesday, October 16th, kicks off early voting for the November 5th election. It is actually here. It is actually happening after all of this talk, after all of the debates and the tweets and the various other things that have happened, and the major candidate withdrawing from a race in July. It's been quite a year. We here in Knox County can all go ahead and start voting on Wednesday, October 16th, and you can find information about, I think there are a dozen early voting locations around the county.
Yeah, there are 11 the first week. There will be a 12th added in the second week. And that 12th one is at the University of Tennessee. So
right. So yeah, you can find all of that information on the website of the Knox County Election Commission, which is at knoxvotes.org. Early voting will run from the 16th through October 31st, trick or treat. And then, of course, Election Day is November 5th. And definitely, Scott, I think we can confidently say that no later than 6 a.m. on November 6th, we will definitely know the results of this election. And it will be over, and everybody will absolutely say, yes, we know who won, and we accept the results of this election.
All but probably one race.
And then on November 7th, we can start on the 2028 election cycle and go ahead and get a head start there.
Yeah. Well, we will see how long it actually takes to reach any sort of resolution in this election. The last time around, it took a while.
It did, and speaking of time, one of the things that Chris Davis, the election administrator in Knox County, harps on, screams from the mountaintops, vote early.
Yeah.
Avoid you, because if you wait till election day, there will be lines. It will take you a long time. So it's a lot more convenient to vote early. That's his message. So,
yeah, and anything could happen. You could fall down a manhole.
A hurricane could flood the city. Like that's one of the most interesting things. Not to go back on that with you guys for a second, but that's one of the most interesting things to look at in some of these this flood damage stuff is like polling locations are flooded out,
and there's starting to be conversation about that, like how they're going to manage that. Obviously, a major challenge in Western North Carolina, but also in some other areas in Florida, obviously areas in Georgia that were hard hit. They are having to figure out how they're going to do that. I think people are especially paying attention to North Carolina, well, and Georgia too, because those are both states where the polling is pretty close in the presidential race, and so there was already going to be a lot of focus on those states heading into the election, and so now that will be heightened. But fortunately, at least for now, we have not had anything happen in Knox County that should in any way interfere with your ability to get out and vote, and you can do that starting this coming Wednesday. All right, well, I think that wraps us up for this week. We will be back next week to talk about anything that happens between now and then, including, I think, probably when we record next week, we will have at least the first day's worth of early voting statistics and kind of get some sense of how much enthusiasm there is out there. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his production work at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we will talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.